Welcome to PM Express Business Edition. Now, finally, those three key tax measures, according to government, has been introduced. What will be the impact of this action on businesses and the larger economy? How should government work to ensure that it gets its tax policies right so that it doesn't end up hurting the geese that lay the golden eggs in businesses? And what about this whole tax policy and the economy and how things will be handled? Well, on PM Express Business Edition, we're looking at businesses, the economy, and taxes. And I'll say that I'm so grateful to have the senior country partner, PwC Ghana, Fish Shagbo, in studio with me here to talk more about businesses, the economy, and taxes. And also via Zoom, economist Professor Charles Aka will be joining us to talk about the economy as well. The economy, businesses, taxes, and how to get it right. All these issues wrapped up on PM Express Business Edition. Right back after this break. Welcome back to PM Express Business Edition as we talk about the recent three key tax measures that was passed by Parliament and how that is going to impact on businesses and the larger economy as well. How are we going to ensure that government gets its tax policy right that will stimulate growth, not end up killing businesses and also the larger economy as well? How is it doing? World Bank in its recent Africa Pulse report is talking about the fact that the economy will grow at 1.8% instead of government's own 2.8%. So how do we look at all these things and influence our tax measures as a country and government? Fisher Shagbo is a senior country partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Appreciate your time so much. How have you been doing? It's been quite an interesting year. You've been in hiding. You've been in hiding, some would say.
We've been in hiding.
You've been in hiding.
Not at all. Just keeping my head down and trying to run my business just like other businesses are trying to run theirs. So it's good to be here, George.
Interesting times being an accounting and auditing firm, some would say?
Interesting times generally. I mean, as you know, we do quite a bit more than accounting
Advisory,
and auditing. We do advisory, we do tax services, general professional services. So it's an interesting time helping to guide our clients through the challenges, but also the opportunities that exist, as well as managing our own business accordingly. Yeah.
So let me just do a quick run through those three tax key measures that was recently passed by Parliament. And there's a Growth and Responsibility Act.
Growth and Stability.
There's also the income tax as well. So Parliament approved these three bills, part of measures to revamp revenue mobilization and what some would say a critical ingredient towards securing an IMF board approval. You also have this, so these were some of the bills. Actually, look at the income tax amendment bill. Government is projecting to get about 1.2 billion Ghana cedis, and then looking at the fact that excise duty amendment bill, government is targeting about 400 million Ghana cedis. The growth and sustainability amendment bill, government is looking at 2.2 billion Ghana cedis. So in all of these things, you're looking at somewhere government saying getting about little over 4 billion Ghana cedis in terms of these taxes in trying to rope for the country. And it's all about this whole IMF program in terms of how we can show steps that we're actually doing the right things to check or improve revenue. Now, let's look at this in terms of the 2023 budget expenditure revenue and deficit. And we have total revenue being 143.9 billion Ghana cedis. You have total expenditure being 205.4 billion Ghana cedis and a deficit of 61.5 billion Ghana cedis. Interesting numbers there on how we should match the revenue. So you look at these total revenues without the new bills, you're looking at 112 billion Ghana cedis, and the tax revenue without this new bill, that is 108 billion Ghana cedis. So the total revenue with these new bills, you're looking at 112.4 billion Ghana cedis. Now, let's look at some of these arguments being put forward. No government can tax its way to economic crisis. Government must cut down expenditure. Taxes will compound hardship of Ghanaians. And these are arguments being put forward and all those things. So, Fish, I'm interested. And some would say, let me first get your thoughts generally on these three key tax measures by government. Interesting, some would say.
Yes. when you say get my thoughts, let me take it from a broader perspective, and then if you want me to narrow it down, we can get there. But as you said, the principle here is that our deficit is rather high, right? So our revenue versus expenditure gap is significant. It has been for a while, for various reasons over the years. It kind of narrowed down a little bit, and then it widened again as we had to spend money to deal with various issues that came our way, the COVID, et cetera, et cetera. So all that these bills, now acts, are trying to do is to increase our revenues to try and bridge the gap between revenue and expenditure a little more. Because in principle, if you have a deficit, there's only two ways of financing it. You're either borrowing, you're either reducing your deficit by raising revenue, by cutting expenditure, or you borrow to fill the gap. And as you know, today where we sit, we don't have access to the national capital market. So to be honest, and I think we said this when we did our budget review in 2023, which did not go down very well with the general public. But honestly, there was little else government could have done but to raise the taxes, because we still have a deficit, and our ability to fill that from borrowing is now diminished.
The argument from some people is that it appears that it is still the same bracket that we are taxing. And I, way back in university, school, expanding the tax net, it appears the net is not expanding.
Absolutely. That's, I think, one of the biggest concerns in all of this. So it is actually a fair point that we have made consistently on behalf of our clients, that those operating in the formal sector are continuously burdened with the new taxes, and that the effort to widen the net needs to be a bit more, or a lot more aggressive in actual fact. But again, if you look at what has happened, particularly with the 2023 budget and the new tax measures that we introduced, you'll see that there's been quite a shift into indirect taxes, right? So indirect taxes, by virtue of how they operate, end up capturing a lot more people than direct taxes. So if you have an increase in VAT, if you have an increase, of course, the stability levy has been restructured somewhat so that it captures a broader section of businesses than it used to. But the principle remains, and we subscribe to that very strongly as a firm, that the tax net does need to be widened, and urgently so.
I'll come back to you on the concerns about businesses when they argue that we are being overtaxed. And then, listen, you end up killing, is it the geese that lays the golden egg? And then what can you do? Let me bring in an economist, Professor Charles Aka. And for you, I mean, how do you get it right with your tax policy in an economy where it is clear that it might not grow as expected and things are not doing well? Is it cutting expenditure the way forward, or still we need to be aggressive on the taxes?
Thank you very much, George, and good evening to my senior in the studio. So my view is, I mean, fiscal policy needs to be situated in the times in which we live. It's not something you do blindly, oblivious of the times in which you live. Fiscal policy is a tool that helps to deal with crisis and economic downturns. So one of the things we need to recognize, and I think all Ghanaians need to recognize, is that the demands of the modern times in which we live will require much larger role of government, and therefore a higher level of taxation is expected than happens in the past. So we should all be prepared that domestic resource mobilization is the way to go, even when the international capital market is available to us. We are where we are now because of overborrowing, in my view, and overborrowing from external sources. And if government can raise more revenue domestically, I think it's a good thing that I support. Our tax revenue to GDP is too low, at less than 13%, and need to be ramped up towards 18, 20, 25%. So we are paying or collecting less taxes as a percentage of our GDP than we have to. So I support efforts by GRA and by government to focus on raising more revenue. However, government must exercise great care in times like this to shape its fiscal policy to be consistent with the times in which we live, so as to strengthen economic incentives rather than chilling and frustrating them. And I think some of the taxes that have been introduced will end up frustrating business and end up frustrating government's its own efforts at economic recovery and prolong a recession rather than overcoming them. And that's where the concern should be. So we are not against tax revenue, but I don't think, I know some people are calling for cutting down on expenditure. And I totally disagree because our expenditures are not that high. It's rather, there's wastage. So what we should be calling for is efficiency in government expenditure and plugging down on or closing down wastage and corruption. If you don't do that and you call for a blanket cut down on government expenditure, we know that they will not cut down the size of the government. They will not stop using their V8. So then eventually they're going to cut down on the expenditures that go to the poor. Rather, we need to look at what expenditures are useless or inefficient, where are the wastages, and where do we cut. These times, actually, all over the world, require government to raise expenditure. This is the time government needs to spend more for social protection, spend more to incentivize businesses, to create job opportunities, to employ the youth that are on the street, that are unemployed. This is not time to cut down expenditure. This is time rather for government to raise more revenue. But the revenue has to be raised, as Vic is saying, from those that are not contributing their due to the economy, to broaden the tax bracket, and not to focus on the same few former sector and ramp up several taxes on them within a matter of a year or so. And I think that is not sound in my view.
Prof, how do you get the fiscal policy right in an economy where things are tied up? And I will bring the e-levy as a typical example. That, listen, there were concerns about have a low rate, you get more. Government said, no. I mean, the first results or the first numbers showed us that, listen, those who were proposing all those concerns had a case. In an economy where it's not expanding as we are supposed to be, how do we get the fiscal policy right when it comes to taxation? So we don't end up killing that geese or those businesses that are doing so well to go down. You don't get any revenue then.
Yeah, so thank you. So that's why you know that I still feel that the e-levy was a bad policy. I advised government at the time they introduced it. I wrote to the GRA and I wrote to the Minister of Finance personally that I thought it could be avoided, and there were existing tax handles that could have been used to raise more revenue. They targeted raising about 7 billion or so cedis. It was never to be. I wrote to them that they would not get it. They wouldn't even get half, and they didn't even get 1 billion. And even this year, they're expecting to raise about 2 billion. That's reducing it from the 6.5 billion that they already targeted. One of the things government needs to be aware of is what we call tax morale. Tax morale is the willingness of people to pay tax when they see it as social justice, as tax is fair, and they can see that the tax is being used for improving economic welfare. And the Ghanaians don't seem to think that. They think they're overtaxed. The people who are paying tax, corporate tax, income tax, VAT, excise taxes, all of those things, people think that there are too much of them. And in their communities where they live, they don't see their roads fixed. Even in Greater Accra, talk less of my village, people still don't have electricity. We are still having some doom. So I'm speaking to you from a light off. I got home, there was no light. Okay, so I'm using generator. So despite all the taxes I pay in Ghana, that has 66 years. Okay, so when you keep asking people to pay more tax and you introduce nuisance tax like e-levy, that you don't know the objective. It's basically taxing people who have paid taxes already and trying to remit money for school fees or for their parents or whatever it is. I don't think it was a good tax. And in the time in which things were already tough, you have an economy that is running inflation above 50%, which means the cost of living has increased by 50%. In fact, the average bread from my local store at the beginning of this year was 8 cedis to 10 cedis per loaf of bread. It's now 27 to 30 cedis, depending on the kind of bread. And bread is to be, in the biblical terms, bread is a common food. Okay, so when there's scarcity of bread, it means everything is scarce. So when you have inflation, that for food inflation is about 60%. Okay, so if you have a situation like that, people are already squeezed. Utility rates have gone up, transport costs has gone up, fuel, a liter of fuel went all the way to more than 20 Ghana cedi per liter. In an economy like that, interest rate has been ramped up by the central bank by 1,500 basis points. In an economy like that, where businesses have to borrow, even small micro businesses have to borrow and pay more than 50% interest, in the informal market. If you're a sensitive, compassionate government, you will be careful with the kind of taxes you want to introduce. And in other countries, this is the time they introduce stimulus packages. The kind of things we did during the COVID, when we thought that the situations were hard and government was giving stimulus packages to support the poor and to help businesses to be afloat. What we are seeing, even though COVID seems to be over, is the same in economics, is the same recession, is the same challenges. Businesses are having a hard time. If you see producer price inflation, it's higher than consumer price inflation. So it's tough for businesses to be able to buy raw materials and to pay utilities and to pay wages and to keep people in jobs. Government wants to keep people in jobs and so that the economy can revive. And that is not the time to ramp up so much taxes that collapse the same businesses that want to create employment. And then you end up actually not raising the revenue because people lose their jobs, businesses are not making profit. So even though the taxes are raised, you don't get the revenue, the buoyancy is not there. And I think that's what we need to look at.
Interesting. I'll be coming back to you to look at even the outlook, because in a time when the Africa Pulse report by the World Bank is also showing signs that the economy wouldn't grow as expected. When we come to Mr. Shagbo, I mean, what is the Pulse telling you in terms of, and not mentioning anybody's name, but you work on a lot of businesses. I mean, what is the true state of businesses in Ghana today? Per what you work on, the financials, the advisory, those who are knocking on your doors for support in terms of advisory, the way forward, and all the rest. What is the Pulse telling us in terms of the business community? How they are faring?
Well, I mean, I think it's no secret that the business community is under severe stress. Times are hard. We've been through hard times before, but these times are particularly hard. And we're coming from a difficult period through the pandemic, which adversely impacted a lot of businesses. Although, like the Prof said, during COVID, there was some kind of support, but it takes time for a business to come out of hardship to stabilize and be able to grow thereafter. We haven't reached that level of stability from which we can grow. And then now the macro situation has become more difficult. And then, to be fair, these additional taxes are also imposing a higher burden. So there's a lot of concern out there. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. Businesses, I think, are having to rethink how they go forward. And in some cases, the viability of those businesses are indeed threatened, just like Prof outlined. So that's actually what we see. That's what we feel from the market and from our clients. And so people are now just trying to think about how to reorganize themselves faced with these new realities that we're contending with.
Do you think that government is oblivious to this challenge?
No, I don't think so.
Because I asked that because of these tax measures and all the rest. Because if your cash cows are struggling, and industry and AGI issued a statement and all the rest, that should influence your tax measures.
Yes, absolutely. But I don't think government is insensitive. We, from where we sit, we have quite a privileged position in the sense that we work on the one hand with government, we work on the other hand with private sector. Some of those chambers and institutions you spoke about, AGI, etc., we work with all of them. So government, from our interactions with them, are actually quite sensitive to the situation. However, The truth of the matter is we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place, right? We have a macro situation that requires us to tighten our belts. And as we said before, our sources of revenue at this point are severely constrained. And really I was going to say the only option, there may be other options, but the most apparent option today is to raise revenue domestically. The quickest way of doing that, I think, is what government has done because of the effort towards rapid fiscal consolidation.
But not hiking rates, might not be. Some might say that a lot still can be done more by of some aggressive measures, more monitoring and all the rest to ensure that these loopholes are closed.
Yes, so we need to run everything in parallel, right? Yes, we have to close the loopholes. Yes, we have to do more in the area of enforcement so that, as we spoke about before, the net can be widened. All of those should go hand in hand. But also it's a matter of timing, right? It depends on how much time we have to get back on our feet. We can have a lower tax burden, but then it just means that it'll take us longer to get back to the stability that we're looking for.
But these businesses are saying that we can't pay these taxes. We are struggling. We are bleeding. We're on life support.
Yes. I mean, that clearly is an issue. So for businesses in that situation, the landscape, regulatory, legal, is what it is. Those bills have now been passed into law. So we all have to contend with them. So what do? You then have to now look at your business and see whether there's different things you can do to try and alleviate the impact of these taxes on your business or to allow you to continue notwithstanding these new taxes. So we fully understand, we sympathize, we empathize, we work with a lot of our clients to try and find solutions around these challenges that are emerging. But you asked me the question, do I think government is oblivious? I will have to say that I do not think so, because in the interactions that we have had with government, I think they do recognize these difficulties. And where we are, businesses will have to find ways and innovative ways to contend with the situation.
I'll be coming to you on the impact and again, what can businesses do in terms of strategizing to stay alive. But help me with some one-on-one education here. Now, the bills have been passed. There are a lot of interest groups that are still pushing. You're going to petition the president to intervene and all the rest. Can anything be done now that these bills have been passed by Parliament, that tomorrow the president can wake up and say, okay, you know, AGI has a case, Kwabena Mensah has a case, so you know something, I'm striking out the Growth and Sustainability Act. Can anything be done within this period before he gives his assent?
So Georgia, I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
Nor do I
tax laws.
nor do I claim to know about parliamentary or procedure of that nature. But as far as I know, once the legislature has passed a bill into law, the only thing left is to receive presidential assent. I stand to be corrected, but I do not believe the president can choose to strike out clause 1, 2, and 5, for example, and leave the rest. So, to best of my knowledge, the best the president can do is decline to give assent. But
he has 90 days, I understand, to work with him, that if he doesn't do that, he needs to write back to Parliament and give his reasons.
So that's the point, that Parliament, in its wisdom, has passed these bills into law. So if there's to be any amendment, has to go back through the process. But the president cannot just sit in his office and decide to strike out or to amend or whatever else.
What does it make of the case for some of the interest groups that are still pushing for something to be done because they think that these taxes are going to hurt them?
No, I think it's fine. You know, associations, concerned businesses, concerned individuals always have the right and the ability to continue to make their case. And then as circumstances change, amendments can be introduced or different things can be done. But the specific question you asked me as to whether, having gone through the parliamentary procedure, some amendment can be made at this point in time, I don't think so. But again, as I said, I'm not a lawyer, so I stand to be corrected.
Let's move quickly to the impact of these taxes and again, how businesses can strategize. And again, another tax 101 here. I mean, this whole argument about tax evasion and tax avoidance. There were some businesses who were arguing that, you know something, we will avoid these, we will strategize to avoid paying some of these taxes. Help me out and my viewers. This 101 thing about avoidance and evasion thing.
Okay. So, put simply, tax evasion is illegal, right? The law is the law.
I can go to jail for that.
And well, whether it's jail or whether you are penalized in some other way, tax evasion is illegal. Tax avoidance, on the other hand, is not illegal. So if you are avoiding taxes through legitimate tax planning procedures, so if you plan your business in such a way that you take advantage of certain exemptions or certain allowances or certain provisions in the law that allows you to have a more favorable tax position, there's nothing wrong with that. But that takes tax planning, and you do not cross the line. You do not do things that are illegal, because then you get into the area of evasion. So to answer your question in simple terms, avoidance is fine. Evasion is illegal. So the way you get to avoidance is through proper tax planning and taking advantage of the provisions of the law itself to give you the most favorable tax position that you can get.
What should businesses be doing now? Because it appears that per the laws and what you've given me in terms of education, immediately no turning back on these laws. How do these medium-sized, large-sized, low-sized businesses, what should be the strategy going forward with respect to these things that are happening?
George, so it very much depends on the nature of the business, the sector in which they are operating, the operating model, so many things. So to answer this question, I would have to do so quite generically, to say that when you're faced with these type of situations, I mean, what really is the challenge here? The challenge here is that you're worried about the cost of doing business.
Yeah.
You're worried about the kind of returns that you can or cannot make, whether you're going to be profitable and whether you're going to return enough money to reinvest in the business or to pay your shareholders. So that's the bottom line. So the question is, you then have to go and re-strategize and say, okay, how do I reduce my cost of operations? How do I manage my liquidity? How do I manage my cash flow? How do I manage my products and services so that I can also increase my revenue and still be in a better position? So it actually calls for a holistic review of the business. And also, as we just spoke about, you may also choose to look at how you're doing your tax planning to make sure that you are paying the right taxes. And when I say paying the right taxes, not necessarily to say that you are you're paying more, well, basically to say that you're not paying more than you should, because in actual fact, in some cases, clients and companies end up paying more than they should because they've not really taken advantage of certain provisions of the law. But this situation calls for a rethink, basically, along so many dimensions, and it's just very much dependent on what type of business you're in and where you're operating.
You think there's a way out for a lot of businesses out there who think that, listen, it's a doomsday for us because of what is happening right now?
I wouldn't start off by saying it's a doomsday scenario. I think it's a challenge, but then businesses can and should rise to the challenge. We need to rethink and innovate. So if you're a manufacturing business, for example, you might choose to look at your supply chain. Is there a different source of supply? Are there substitutes you can use? For example, there are different things one ought to think about. So
on the business side, again, how do we ensure, and Prof raised the issue about the moral behind it, that, listen, people feel that they are dying and government is fast-tracking their death. Obviously, from even the SMEs and all the rest, they will definitely find some innovative ways to avoid some of these taxes.
Yes, I think we also feel and hear those sentiments. I mean, look, we're a business ourselves, and we are also feeling the impact of all these taxes. We can only do our part, and businesses can only do their part in terms of what I said before, strategizing as to how you can be as efficient as possible. But ultimately, we also have to continue to engage with the policymakers, with government, so that everybody understands that as things get better, hopefully, in other words, the deficit is reduced, the economy begins to turn around, then some of these stringent measures can begin to be eased to encourage growth and development of businesses, because it's all about the cost of doing business and the environment in which we do business. And if it's unfavorable, ultimately we all lose. So the hope is that this is a let's say a transition period. These taxes have been imposed. We will have to pay them. But like Prof said, if our spending from a national level, government level, can be efficient, then presumably in the short to medium term, we should be able to see some of these taxes being rolled back or being reduced.
How do we bridge the gap in terms of more of pre-engagement? Because I had a lot of businesses and even the Chamber of Telecoms complain when the e-levy thing.
Yes.
And a lot of people even pre-budget, and tax lawyer will say that, will say that we do the marriage before we go for the marriage counseling. How do we deal with that challenge? Because most of businesses say, we woke up one morning and we heard this is coming out.
Yeah. That's clearly an issue. That's clearly an issue. We get that a lot, as I said, from our clients and the associations that we work with. The level of consultation and stakeholder engagement clearly needs to be improved, right? The classic example is the e-levy, as you said. There was a lot of engagement, but that was after the proposal had already been
marriage
tabled.
Before marriage counseling. Yeah.
So I think that's a fair point. That level of stakeholder engagement needs to be significantly improved, because nobody has all the answers, right? So if you're in government, you clearly don't have all the answers. The business people also have some input to give. They may also not have all the answers, but I guess if there's more consultation and collaboration, a more efficient, a more effective system can develop, and then everybody can buy into it. Everybody contributes their quota for as long as it is needed. And then, as I said before, hopefully if we begin to do the right things more often, then this type of tax burden can begin to reduce as we go forward.
And I'll be coming back to you in these times like this, what would be your advice to businesses in terms of credit as well? Because the banks are also having their own problems. And would this still be a time where you try to cut down on your credit exposure, do some realignment to stay in business as well? But let me bring in Prof. Aka. In terms of trying to stimulate growth in these times, are we caught in between the hard rock and the deep blue sea? Because some are saying that looking at the current fiscal policy of government, I mean, it doesn't seem like we are looking at stimulating growth. And some are also saying the second one question as well, we might be giving in too much in trying to get an IMF program.
That's my major concern. It's a major worry to me, because what we find ourselves in economics is very unusual. It's what we call stagflation. Stagflation was, there are several crises that a country can suffer. We have recession, we can have a depression, we can have such economic crisis, downturns. When you have a stagflation, it's defined as three phenomena taking place at the same time, where growth is stagnated or declining, as we are seeing in Ghana. Pre-pandemic, we're growing around 6% and above. And then since the pandemic, growth is declined. Last year, around 3.2%. This year, government is focusing around 2.8. The World Bank is saying it's going to be lower. And forecast to 2025 is low under the IMF program. Now, when growth is being sacrificed for an IMF program, and at the same time, inflation is in double digit and is pernicious and pervasive across all the items and sectors, and is persistent over a year. And then you have unemployment at the same time rising and also in double digit, and youth unemployment is over 33%. These three demonic forces, we call them stagflation. And the most sensible, sound economic policy is to avoid stagflation. Because when stagflation takes place, then basically you are in a crisis situation. The economy is not growing, inflation is high, unemployment is rising. It's poor macroeconomic management. So, and I think in times like this, we should not forget our economic history. one of the most eminent economists is John Maynard Keynes. Became very popular during the days of the British stagflation and economic depression in the 1930s. And what he asked for was a fiscal stimulus, counter-cyclical policy. In terms of booms and busts, the policy must be counter-cyclical. It must not be pro-cyclical. So when you are in a crisis, you don't bring in policies that lengthens the crisis. And I'm afraid the policies that we are having now, it means that we are not going to recover now and immediately, because when you have a crisis like this, what you require is to cut down taxes on those that are already suffocating and to increase government expenditure. These are three. And this is the time to run budget deficit. There's no good time for government to run deficit than this time. So if you look at the deficit that you showed us, 61.5 billion.
That's huge.
That's just about 7% of GDP. It's not something to cry about. We've had other countries have run deficits in 20%, 15%. Even in our own history, we've had double-digit deficit before. Government is proposing this year to have a deficit in times of crisis, high unemployment, high inflation, on all these exchange rate problems and this high interest rate. Government is saying that my deficit is 61.5 billion. GDP for this year is estimated to be 800 billion. So 61.5 over 800 billion is less than 8% budget deficit, 8% of GDP. And I am saying that this is time for government to increase expenditure to help the poor and to lower taxes that are already burdening the companies that need to increase employment. So that even if we double our deficit from 8% to say 12%, 15%, in a global crisis time, we have not done something.
But Prof, some will say that, interesting economic theory, but some will say that when the capital market closed, with people complaining that they are being overtaxed and all the rest, what would be that source of funding to finance this generous economic policies in these times?
I can see I think one of the things I can show you, and I think other people are aware, and I think Vish is aware, that there's a large section of the Ghanaian economy that is not taxed.
Yes.
And that's where government needs to look at. My own calculations I've done, government can raise as much as 50 billion Ghana cedi this year alone if they are willing to do the hard work. The GRA has to really sit up. In fact, from the property taxes alone, we can raise close to 20 billion this year alone from property taxes. Even if you decide to focus on Accra, Tema, Kumasi, Takoradi alone for this year. So this is, it's not hard thing. It doesn't, no, can somebody explain to me why in times like this, the Minister of Finance thought that they should withdraw and cancel rotos if we really need money, and you want to now raise all these 3 tax bills. I was coming from somewhere in our road last week. I followed cars that are coming from Burkina Faso, registered number, foreign cars, driving all the way from Burkina Faso all the way to Accra, and they don't pay 1 cedi toll, road toll. What is wrong with us? How do we say we need money and then we just sit down by the stroke of the pen and decided that road tolls, because there's some traffic in Kaswa or 1 or 2 places, we don't need road tolls anymore, only to turn back and say we are bringing it back again. Okay, so in the same way, why are some people that are in the informal sector not being taxed? Look at the 2023 budget. Government is expecting to raise 800 million from the self-employment. Self-employment, 800 million, less than 1 billion. I dare say we can raise more than 10 billion Ghana cedi from the self-employment people, even if we ask them to pay 5% of their revenue before tax. And they are not hiding. I'm not talking about people that are doing secret business. I'm talking about self-employment business that are in Makola, Accra, Abobloshi, in Adenta, Medina, La Paz, by the roadside, hairdressers, seamstresses, mechanics that are making, some of them are making 1,000 Ghana cedi a day. Just, it's just a fair contribution to make property taxes. And then one of the things that countries have done, which I don't know we have not done, instead of increasing VAT by 2.5 percentage points and increasing corporate taxes, for example, or increasing income tax, you raise taxes on the high net people. In every crisis, it's also an opportunity for some companies and some individuals to make a lot of money. I've done an analysis of the Ghanaian economy, and there are companies and firms that benefited from the COVID. There are companies that are benefiting from the crisis we are having. You have heard Sunak in UK saying he's raising about 5 billion windfall taxes on oil companies. And I'm saying that there are oil companies in Ghana, there are companies in the mining sector, in the oil sector, there are companies in the health sector, there are companies that were doing COVID testing during the COVID period that made huge, supernormal, abnormal profit. There's nothing wrong for government to say that let's share the windfall taxes. And if you look at those Ghana Club 100 alone, I looked at the income statement of the Ghana Club 100 firms. And if you see the profit that some of them have made, and if government sat down with them and said, look, your normal profit is, let's say, 200 million. You have made about 500 million, 700 million this year. We impose maybe a 20% tax or 33% tax. Let's divide the extra profit, not your total profit. You pay your normal profit back at the normal corporate tax of 25% or 20%. By the extra profit you've made, we share it. You take 2/3, I take 1/3. It's done in Malaysia. It's done in Singapore. It's done in the UK. It's done. We call it windfall taxes. And the government could have done that, focusing on about 200, 300 firms that are high net income, rich people, and ask them to contribute. There are some countries that are introducing luxury tax on luxurious things that the rich consume, including luxurious cars. These are ways to tax the rich to support the poor. You don't leave these things and then you leave, ringworm and you're pursuing mosquito. There are serious leprosy that is killing the economy. We leave that and we are pursuing poor people income. Look at the income tax that you adjust, increase income tax. There are people that are earning 500 Ghana cedi in Ghana, national service personnel earning 550 Ghana cedi. You ask them to pay tax. And then there are people that are earning billions. And if you look at our tax, the higher bracket is just 35%. We could have increased that to 40% and asked those who are very, very rich to contribute 40% of their income, instead of asking the poor people that earn 450 minimum wage, 500 national service personnel who live in Kaswa and works in Adabraka, spends about 20 Ghana cedi on transport every day. His income is finished by 2 weeks' time on transportation alone. He still has to be taxed. And then there are people who are not taxed. People are sitting in market counting hundreds of thousands every day, and they don't pay even 10% tax. This is not fair. Our tax system is not effective. And I think we need to look at how to make our tax system effective and to use it to redistribute income so that it becomes more progressive and tax more rich people to help the poor. I think that's what we have not sat down to do.
Prof, in 2 minutes, for you, in all of these things and how we've not gotten our fiscal policy right, are you worried about the outlook for the economy going forward in terms of growth? Because I'm also seeing that it's very critical that we get it right.
I wish the right thing would be done. From where I sit, I don't think we are discussing much with the people that we need to talk to. I'm surprised that in most of the policies that government has introduced, there's not been extensive collaboration with the business and with academia in particular. For example, at ISA, where I sit, in the economics department, at Legon, UCC, Tech, in other countries, this is time to engage across board, bipartisan, and also with the business community, stakeholders, and especially with the academia. And I don't think that much discussion is going on. I think the Minister of Finance will benefit from some serious economic analysis. I'm afraid that none of the ministers, either the minister or the two deputies, has a professional degree in economics. And I think that is something that they will need. They may need to look at in future. We may need to legislate that at least one of the deputy ministers or the minister himself must have a PhD in economics. It will help a lot because I respect accountants, I respect finance auditors, but economics is a unique profession. And the ministry is a ministry of finance in economic planning. And I think if you just focus on raising revenue as a finance or as an accountant, something, and you are not looking at the implication on wider economy and forecasting, we will be shooting ourselves in the foot. And I think
I mean, for you, what's the way forward in terms of business environment, the pause, concerns, consumer confidence, and what do you think should be the way forward in trying to ensure that, listen, in these times like this, we get it right with our tax policy measures, we don't kill businesses. For you, what do you think should be the way forward?
I agree with Prof to the extent that there needs to be a lot more dialogue, a lot more consultation, and a lot more communication, right? Because the Prof said, academia has a lot of analysis or information to share. Business people are at the practical end of things, and they can also share their perspectives. Then the policymakers are also there, the ministers or the ministries and the government agencies. Listening? Well, that's where the dialogue comes in. I think once the platform is there for the dialogue to be held on a regular basis, on a consistent basis, not just just before the budget or just after the budget, but on an ongoing basis, I think collectively there can be a better approach and a better solution to all of this. At the very least, if everybody understands what is being done and why and how, they are able to give their input, and then I think overall there can be a better outcome, particularly for business. Because at the end of the day, if we're looking for business to actually drive the economy or the private sector to drive the economy, then that channel of communication needs to be enhanced, and significantly so.
Do you see light at the end of the tunnel? I mean, looking at from what you are doing and the exposure, the bigger picture that you have in terms of the real happenings in the business space.
Well, business and businesses are resilient, right? There has been difficulties along the way. This is not the first time we're having economic turbulence, but businesses typically find a way of dealing with the challenges. It's not always the case that everybody survives, but obviously that's the objective. So to answer your question, is there light at the end of the tunnel? I would say certainly so. And I think that with everything that the Prof has said, with what the chambers have said, the AGI, other trade associations, etc., the CSOs, etc., I think those messages are getting through. And I believe and I hope that the dialogue will certainly be improved going forward. And from the business perspective, I think what we need to do is to look at our various operating models and see how we can make our businesses more resilient.
I talked about the credit issue and then the debt exchange program. And what do you think should be the advice to businesses as well in these times?
Well, I don't think the advice changes as a result of the debt exchange. The principle is that when you're running a business, you must always keep a very close eye on the level of gearing that you carry. So you don't overextend yourself. So you look at your business, you look at what you can afford, and then you play within the zone of affordability. Business is about taking risk, all right, but don't overextend yourself and make sure that you are sustainable from a financial point of view.
30 seconds, your final thoughts?
Well, my final thoughts are that, yes, clearly there are challenges out there. The landscape is difficult, and we see it on a day-to-day basis with our clients. A lot of difficulty, a lot of losses being made, cash flows are tight, but it's not the end of the world. I think that there are some things that can be done. And I go back to what I said before. Let's take another look at our respective operating models and see how we can fine-tune them for the current circumstances.
Prof, 30 seconds, your final thought. 30 seconds, Prof.
Yeah, thank you. So I also think that it's not the end of the world. We have one Ghana. We are praying for Ghana and we are hoping for the best. But I think that we should not think that IMF program is a panacea. We have been to IMF before several times, and they are not there to fix the problems we have. Our economy has a very serious problem, and it's not an NPP problem or NDC problem. It's been there since independence. And we need to have a broader consultation to fix the problem. Otherwise, we will go to an IMF program. It's actually going to be very painful. There's going to be a lot of austerity measures, and this tax package is actually part of the austerity measures, and it's going to be difficult for business and for workers and for consumers. But I hope that all this pain we are taking is going to lead to a more structural transformation of our governance system and our economic system, so that when we come out of this pain, we can now have a sustainable transformation and economy that provides sustainable jobs.
Professor Charles Zaka is with ISA, an economist, and thank you so much for your time. And also, Mr. Shabo, Senior Country Partner, PwC Ghana, I appreciate your time so much. And thank you so much for having time. You're busy schedule to make it in the city.
Not at all. You're most welcome.
I know the debate will still go on in your offices and homes about how do we get it right, our fiscal policy, and ensure that we don't hurt businesses whilst ensuring the economy expands and grows for all of us. It's PM Express Business Edition. Have a great day.